guys, it's Kevin in my review for Countdown. And what Countdown is essentially about is we center on our main character, who is basically this medical student, and she comes across this app that a lot of people have also stumbled upon, and essentially this app is it's called Countdown, and it tells you exactly when it is that you're going to die. Of course, she doesn't think much of it, but when certain coincidences start happening, she very quickly starts to buy into it, and then she starts to realize that she is in fact the next target. She has 2 days left to live, and now she has to do what she can to try to end this once and for all and figure out what might be causing all of these deaths to occur, but also how she can prevent hers, and that's really all I'm going to say. So Countdown overall, I was not really excited for this film. This looked incredibly generic to me. It looked really silly. Look, the concept alone, it's definitely an interesting idea, but it just seemed like one of those horror films that was going to be very generic. It didn't really seem like it was going to do anything new, and that's pretty much what it is. I mean, this is a pretty bad film. There just isn't really a lot that this film does all that well. It's not the worst thing ever, but it's definitely not a really well done horror film, and it really does continue the streak of just really terrible horror films. But we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And that's the thing I will give this movie. Most of the cast here actually isn't that bad. In fact, I actually thought Elizabeth Lail as our main character was actually pretty good. She actually does anchor the film quite well. Even in moments where the film isn't working, she still remains, someone that is very likable in that way. You like following her. She's not a dumb character or anything, which I definitely did like seeing. Her character wasn't nearly as dumb as you are expecting. And I did think overall she did do a pretty good job, especially in moments where she has to emote and she has to be really upset, even though, yes, it might not have felt as earned because of the screenplay. Lail really did elevate it for me overall, and I thought she did do a really good job. Same goes for Talitha Bateman, who I've been a fan of since Annabelle Creation, and it was really good to see her in a more meaty role, because she really hasn't had a meaty role since then, and I did think she also did do a really good job here. Again, even though her character is very much lacking, she still is pretty solid here. Jordan Calloway also, I thought, was pretty good. He's this other guy that our main character ends up stumbling across, and I thought he definitely did do a really good job. The rest of the cast also is pretty solid. PJ Byrne does a really good job here. I actually really liked, someone that I really liked was Tom Segura as this clerk, Derek, who is like this guy that runs this retail store. He actually was really great here. He provides some really nice levity and was probably one of the big standouts of the entire film for me. Again, really this entire cast, there's a lot of problems with this movie, but the cast for the most part really isn't one of them. There were definitely some performances, like Ann Winters, I didn't really think was that great, but really other than that, I wasn't really that upset with like the acting in this film, and that's something that I can rarely say when it comes to horror films like this, so that alone is kind of an improvement. But now we get to the directing and the writing here, which this is where the film really goes off the rails. There's a lot of dumb shits in this movie. And look, with a film like this, that's to be expected. But really, this film is very tonally inconsistent. I think that's its biggest issue. This film has a very hard time trying to figure out, is this trying to be a serious horror film, or is it trying to be more of a satire? Because there are some moments here that definitely try to be scary. It fails miserably. There's not a single second of this film that I was even the least bit terrified, not even the least bit creeped out. I mean, there was no point in this movie where I was even the least bit, built with tension. I didn't really feel anything during this film, so it doesn't do a really good job with that. When it tried to lean into the satire elements, it actually does do a little bit better with that. The problem is they're just not consistent. The film doesn't really know what it wanted to be in that way, and I actually do think it would have benefited more if it was more of a satire, because it actually was kind of working when they weren't taking it as seriously, but they frequently revert back to the more serious, generic horror tone that just doesn't really work for this film, and I just don't think Justin Deck did a really good job directing this movie overall. And I mean, when the only other film he's done besides this is a ripoff of Cars, I mean, that's to be expected. He obviously hasn't really done that much. He obviously is not that experienced, and I think this film just overall would have benefited more if they had a more experienced director. Same with the writing. Deck's writing just isn't very good here. It's very, very surface level. There's a lot of stuff that I just don't think he does a very good job with. The whole concept alone, it's not one that's necessarily bad. I actually do think you could do a lot with that. This idea that there's this app on your phone and it tells you when you're going to die. That could actually be a really good psychological thriller, but that's not what this film is trying to be. It's trying to be a more straight up horror film, and this concept does not really lend itself to that. It's very obvious what's going on here. It's very obvious from the beginning that there's some sort of curse that's being placed because only certain people are getting this. Other people, they get the app and it says like they have like 92, like 86 years to live, or they have like, they have like 12 years left. Like it's normal, arbitrary times. But for some characters, that's those who are facing imminent danger. So it's obvious from the beginning there's something else going on, and because that there just isn't a lot of tension here, and because every horror film needs this as well, we have the stupid thing where like someone brings up this app and they don't believe that it's connected to anything, and just there's so many cliches that this film goes into. And again, there were ways that they could have avoided it. I saw potential here for this to be something different, for this to go in a different kind of direction, and unfortunately, it just really didn't overall. It also doesn't help that there's a very low body count in this movie. There's not a lot of people that die. We definitely hear about it, but there's not a lot of kills in this film, so there just isn't as much tension as there should be. The characters also here are very surface level. I will give the film credit. They definitely try to get you to care about them. I mean, our main character, Quinn, there's definitely some things you can sort of dive into. She's someone who her mom has died because that she very much blames herself for it. She has a very contentious relationship with her sister because of it as well, but it feels very cliche. There's not really a lot that they do with it. There is a really good scene of her and Jordan Calloway's character and them talking about, and them bonding over their loved ones who have both passed away. And I actually thought that was a really good moment, but it really doesn't serve much more than just an afterthought. This is a thing that the film gives as a motivation to these characters, as a reason for you to care, and it just isn't really dived into all that much. And because that, it just comes across very surface level. Most of our characters here just really aren't that great. There's also a very shoehorned in subplot with our main character where they try to do this like Me Too storyline with her and the head doctor, that she that's sort of like a mentor to her and things like that. And it was, every time they did that, it really took me out of the movie. I thought it was so forced. It felt like they were really trying to pander to like the Me Too movement crowd, and it just didn't work at all. And again, I've said this before, I'm all for that storyline. I'm all for films diving into that, but I just don't think this was the vehicle to do it. I really don't. I don't think this film needs to do that, especially when they try to use that as a motivate, especially when they try to use that as part of the climax. And I don't want to get into it too much, but that becomes far too integral than it really should have. They don't really do a good job with that, and it just felt like a random thing that they insert in here, and it ended up going in a very, very predictable direction that I wasn't too surprised, but not as predictable as I was expecting, I will say that. Peter Facinelli's character, he didn't go in the predictable direction I was expecting, but it still wasn't one that I think particularly worked very well at all. So again, that wasn't really great here. And also, the way that they establish the rules, they're very loose. They don't really make a lot of sense here. There are ways that they try to dive into this, but it just comes across as very silly. The characters will often try to cheat their death, and it doesn't really work out, but the way that they actually get out of this situation And there's just a lot of things that contradict that we see as this film goes on that just doesn't make a lot of sense. And it's mainly just used as a way for certain characters to live, because obviously we don't want to see our main character killed off. I actually thought, and I don't know why I thought this, but there was a point in the movie where I thought, what if they just killed off our main character and like Talitha Bateman ends up becoming the main character? That didn't happen. That's not what ends up happening here, but it would have been interesting. It would have been just a little bit interesting if they would have done that. They didn't, and because that is just a very generic story because of that. But the one thing, like I said, I will give this film is that it actually is kind of funny at points. There's this clerk that they stumble upon that works in this retail store that I actually did get a kick out of. He's someone who is very disgruntled with his job. You can tell he's someone who, you know, he really is only doing it for the money. He's very annoyed by many customers, and I actually thought he was a lot of fun. Anytime we cut to this character, he actually was making me laugh, and I think they did a good job with that. But this also works against the film because there's this other character they try to use for humor that really didn't work for me. It's this unconventional priest of sorts that is way more just in touch with, like, you know, the you know, basically with you know, modern things today, and he really did not work here. I mean, again, PJ Byrne was not really the problem. He did the best with what he had, but just as a character, it just didn't really work. I honestly thought he was pretty annoying at points, and I didn't really think he worked all that well. And where that character ends up going as well is very predictable. So again, the screenplay, there's just not a lot to say about it. It's very predictable. It goes in the directions that you're pretty much expecting it to. The cinematography here is actually not too bad, and it's mainly because they don't use a lot of like CGI and things like that. But when they do use it, it really is not that great, and it was fine, I guess. Not really much to say there. Score's fine as well, not really a lot there. And the editing, this film is very fast-paced, and I do think it definitely was too fast-paced in that way. I think they really needed to spend some time getting you into this situation, getting you to care more about these characters, because they really do throw this at you. I mean, especially a certain element that I really felt could have been dived into more, and I don't think they did as good of a job with. I will say the film's not boring. Like, it definitely is it's one of those bad films that wasn't boring to me, so I will definitely give it that. But just pacing-wise, I just didn't really think it was all that great. And the ending of this movie is laughably stupid. The way that they defeat this entity is really dumb, and the ending itself, it really doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Like, there's something that they establish at the end of this movie. There's something that they learn in a way to try to, like, break this cycle or whatever. And then they immediately, like, backtrack. And it's like, wait, you established this, so then shouldn't this happen? How does this make any sense for this to happen? It didn't make any sense, and it really is only there just so the film can do a gotcha at the end and have like a sequel bait type ending, because every single horror film needs to be a franchise. We can't have standalone horror films evermore. They all got to connect in some way, and just, that really annoyed me. I can't stand it when horror films do that, and this film has one of the most obvious and in-your-face sequel bait endings I have seen in a very long time. And it's the kind of sequel bait ending that makes this entire film just feel pointless. This entire film just feels like a setup to a second movie that we don't even know if it's going to happen. In fact, I mean, it probably will, because Blumhouse usually does really well because their films cost nothing and they do well and whatever. Guys, Countdown sucks. It's basically what I expected it to be. This is a very lazy and very generic horror film with surprisingly competent actors that are doing the best they can. It is actually fun at points, but for the most part, it just isn't anything different. It is everything you're very much expecting it to be. The kills themselves are actually very minimal. The film is never scary. It's not interesting, and just overall is a film that really feels very weak, and it really does suck, because I do think we could have gotten a good film out of this, but because the fact that it is very surface level, it has a director that is just very tonally confused with where he wants to go, and just a story that is so paint by numbers, it just makes for a horror film that doesn't really do anything decidedly different. And again, I think if they would have leaned into the comedy heavier than they did, sort of like a Happy Death Day or something like that, I actually might have ended up enjoying this movie. I think it actually could have been something a little bit more special, but alas, that's not the film that we have here. And because that, it just comes across as incredibly derivative and a film that you've seen 1,000 times before. And so because of that, I am going to give Countdown overall a D+. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you guys saw of this movie overall. Love your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.
Moving on.